Merlin, Kubernetes, network magic. Hey everybody, my name is John Capobianco. I've been playing with Kubernetes maybe 2 days, and I'm pretty excited to show this development and building. There's many ways we could look at it or coin the phrase, but building a microservice really that takes an old CLI command, the show IP interface brief, and transforms it into like an always on demand, always up to date web service that we can just call through a web browser. I don't want to say I have this completely working. I don't claim to be an expert on any of these technologies. I am learning, and I thought I would share and learn in public to generate ideas, to stimulate your thinking, to get some feedback from people who maybe have done similar things or who are better, more well versed in these technologies. So let's go over at the high level what's happening here. So I have open source project called Merlin that started as this sort of idea where we can run a CLI command. In our case, we're going to use show IP interface brief as our demonstration command at the CLI, and I'll show you what that looks like. Well, I use PyATS to parse that command on a device or multiple devices, a topology in a test bed. I get JavaScript object notation back that my next step is to run through a Jinja 2 template and render a CSV file, a markdown file, and I've already circled it because it becomes important later, an HTML page that is that old show interface brief, IP interface brief command represented as these three, what I consider business ready document suite, BRDs. So now we've moved into Docker and the idea of containers, and I'm going to show you this. And what we have is this whole ecosystem, everything up above, including Ubuntu, the Linux environment, Python 3, pip for Python 3, PyATS, as well as Rich and SSH client. And you'll see, I don't want to spoil it, but something else later down this whiteboard. So I want to make a CD-ROM image, an ISO, a Docker container image that people just run, literally run Docker run John Capobianco /Merlin : IP interface brief. If you don't have it locally, it will go to Docker.io and download it and just run it. As we've also seen, we can use volumes to, I'm going to say, mount files and folders that are inside of the CD-ROM into either Windows or Linux locally on your tower. I'm trying to draw a local tower. Now, that is all incredible, and I'm really impressed by that people can, with Docker desktop, run the container on demand at will. Well, now I am exploring what's called Kubernetes, which is, I can't even begin to describe it. It's its own ecosystem for managing and dealing with these images that we've created and these containers that we've created. It has its own set of terminology, its own networking requirements, its own DNS, everything. It's incredibly powerful stuff. And I don't want people to be afraid of it because it sounds intimidating, because you've never heard it before, or because you've only seen real high-level experts on the internet talking about their Kubernetes solutions. Just start reading documentation, start looking into it. Start with what I have. Make a solution in Docker, and then try to move into Kubernetes. So here's what I thought was really neat. I have that HTML page. Well, what if I add a web server to the image and make those business ready documents available as a service? Go into the DNS name or the IP address, a special port. Boom, there's that HTML document. On demand, in the cloud, ready to go as a service. No more CLI. What's the IP interface brief look like on device X? Well, go to device x.ip interface brief. Port 8080, right? Whatever URL you want. There's the HTML version, and it's just it's gathered it in the last minute or so. Now, where Kubernetes is going to come in is hopefully making that service something I need it to run continuously. I'd like it to run again in a minute, run again in another minute, just continuously run IP interface brief and present it to our users on demand, which I haven't quite got to yet. I've explored some different things. I'm still looking at the best way to solve this problem. So let's do the demonstration. Here's cut to the demo for anyone who's tuning in. This is going to take us up to the solution in Docker Desktop as a Docker container image, the process to convert it into the Kubernetes environment from a Docker environment, and then hopefully we can explore it and see if we can make it work as a container in a Kubernetes resource is what I should say. So let's quickly go into the Docker solution. And I'm going to, for the sake of brevity, to keep it short, I have this image of IP interface brief in Docker Desktop. It's not running as an app. It's here. It was built about an hour ago. Let's go explore what this is. So I have an output folder to store the commands. Don't worry about that. Then I have this Docker file. Now the Docker file is installing Ubuntu. It's telling the Debian front end to be non-interactive when I spin up Apache, meaning when I spin up the Apache 2 web service, don't be interactive. Copy in my templates, copy in my testbed, copy in my Python, copy in my IP interface brief shell script, which we'll come back to. Upgrade Ubuntu, install Python 3, install Python 3 pip, install the OpenSSH client as a run layer. Another run layer, install PyATS and clean it up. Install Rich, install Apache 2. Copy in my style sheet. Now that Apache 2 is installed and we have the folder for the default HTML, copy in my style sheet for the HTML. Now what's interesting is I have two commands I want to issue. And I've played with this back and forth where I want to run a PyATS job where it connects to the network, runs the command, brings back the data, converts it into the business ready documents, right? My job, my Python Merlin code. Following that, I want to maybe move some files around from the output into my web server and then start the web server. That's kind of hard and tricky to do in Docker because we can only run command once. So what I'm going to do is pass it along to the bash shell, born again shell, and I'm going to run a little shell script, which is very simple. It's just my serial commands of my PyATS run job and the testbed file. Copy in the HTML file over index.html, and then spin up the Apache control in the foreground. Bring it forward and let it run so that Docker can volume mount it. Now that's the Docker file. So now I want to build it as a service in Docker Compose. And what I have is my IP interface brief service. The image, I want to name this image, my name, my repo, my tag, from that Docker file. And now this is important. And I think I have to talk about this here. Yeah, I skipped over this. After I've run my command, I'm exposing port 80. That is the container's port 80. In my Docker Compose, I'm mapping 8080, meaning my local host, to the container's port 80. In theory, exposing the web interface of the container. I know this is a lot and I'm trying to go slow. So that's the Docker file and that's the Docker Compose. Again, I have a Jinja 2 template that's going to do all the magic. Here is the HTML page that you're going to see as a Jinja 2 template. And as you can see, I have a for loop for each interface, and then I make one of my table fields said interface, and it loops over it. I'm calling that style sheet here that I copied in to pretty up the output. So that is all right, and here is the Python for interface brief. This is a little bit, I'm not going to go over all of it, but I'm passing the show IP interface brief into a function that learns, right, does device.parse, parses that show command. So as of that step here in this file, this variable contains the JavaScript. So I create a JSON file, a YAML file, my 3 business-ready files, and then I'm writing if file type, output type is HTML. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if I need to write it over index HTML. I sort of forgot I had this logic in here. Well, there's one way to test it, that's for sure, and that would be to remove it from the shell script. And what I'm talking about here is I've caught something. I realized that here I have copy that interface brief over that file location. But I think as part of my logic in Python, I can just write the file over index.html. And I don't have to worry about this copy step. Let's do that. Let's save that. Now I think that should not need to recompile. Let me flush the image, and I'll show you that I'm not cheating here in any way. And what we do now is docker compose up. So don't worry about that. That's a Kubernetes thing that I have on the screen. So I need to do docker compose up. And if it has to pull layers, I'll pause the video and come back to it. Hopefully it's all cached. So it's building that IP interface brief service, my Docker container and image with the tag. It's okay. Yeah, it's not cached, unfortunately. Well, so as this builds, and then it's going to bring up the service, I'm going to pause here. We'll come back to this once it's built and ready to go, and then we'll move along. Don't go anywhere. All right, so it's pulled down all the layers, and it's actually just running here for the first time. Good timing. So it did all those things from the Docker file and exported to this Docker, and here is the Merlin running for the IP interface brief. It is finished, and now Apache is actually up and running. So now the really neat thing, if I go to localhost, there is the IP interface brief. It's pretty neat, right? So let's make a change, and I'll show you how easy this is, right? So let's remove that loopback that I set up. No int LO 100. And now it's gone. So then in theory, if I come into Docker here and find my container app, again, this has nothing to do with Kubernetes yet, and restart the job, I don't know, is it already done restarting the job? No, here it is here. So it's restarting the job. And if I just switch over to here and it's gone. It's gone. I don't need to shell into the device. I don't need to, someone wants to know something about, this is IP interface brief. This could be anything you want. I'm going to show you what we can add into here. Just go to the device URL port 8080. It'll tell you what's up or down. Now, where does Kubernetes come in? And where's the Kubernetes link here? So let me just chat real quick. I talked about the timing. And wouldn't it be great, instead of me having to go and click start the job, which is easy enough, it's one click away. But yeah, I'm a lazy guy. Can I eliminate even that one click, right? I think so with Kubernetes and running that image as a resource in a cluster on a node as a cron job or as a pod. I don't know yet. We're still exploring the trigger mechanism, but scheduling is a big part of Kubernetes because of things like what I want to do. I want to run that You saw it takes 3 seconds or 4 seconds. I think I can tell Kubernetes to run that every 15 seconds, every minute. I don't know. And then you just go to the website and refresh the data, and whatever's changing, whoever's done configs, if you just want to check the status of that device's IP interface brief or whatever, it's just available to you as a service. So let's do some of this. This is pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to stop everything and kill everything here. So let me stop the container there. Let me destroy the... I don't know. I just think I locked it up. It's not running in here anymore. Yeah, it's a warning there. So can I just destroy it there? Yep. Yeah, see, it thinks it's running. Here, let me remove that layer. There. Okay, so that's gone. And now I'm not going to destroy the image. I'm not going to do that locally. I don't want to rebuild it. So now I want to make that Kubernetes resources. Kubernetes is running, and we have this Docker compose file. And I'm going to keep VS Code open side by side here. So what we want to do is take this Docker compose service and turn it into Kubernetes resources. So I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to use a utility called compose with a K and convert, and that's all I need to type because I'm in the folder with the Docker compose file. This is a Kubernetes tool that I had to install, and it's going to let me convert. Did I not type that in right? Unknown command, convert. Yes, I did mean convert. Convert. Sorry, I'm excited. So there, bang, 2 new files. So service name has been created from IP interface brief, and it made a service, and it made a deployment. And these are YAML files that sort of look like our Docker compose file, but much more in depth with a bunch more details. Right, there's our service. You can see it's a kind of service, kind of deployment. This is an app. Right, so now we're going to bring those into our Kubernetes. Now before we start, we're going to make sure that our node is up. Now our new important command here is kube control. And if you do -- help, it has all kinds of stuff. I want to do get nodes. All right, I have a node up. That's important. Make sure you have a node running. And if you don't, just restart your Kubernetes service in your Docker desktop, and that will make sure you have the default node. Now, I have to bring in the code, and I want to show you quickly this. There's a really good reference guide. I want to bring it in here, the Kubernetes compose. Oh boy. Compose. Compose. Transform a Docker file, and it's right in here and underneath, deep down under configure pods and containers, how to transform it. So we've done these steps, but how do we bring it in? Well, we have to apply those YAML files. And we're going to apply them with commas, just like this says. So kube apply F, kube control apply F, and then we have the names of those. I've cleared the screen. The names of those files, right? So I'm just going to grab them from here so I don't get them wrong. And we're going to just comma separate them. And so kube apply. And that's it, right? Deployment.apps, and then IP-interface-brief created, and service. So now I'm going to check these things. First, I'm going to do kube control get deployment, and I should have, there's my deployment, and it's ready, and it's up to date, and it's available. I'm going to do the same thing now, but for service, and I have a service with an IP address. There's no external IP, and the ports. Now I'm going to get pods And there's my pod, and my pod is running. Now, I don't know whether or not localhost is still going to work like it did with Docker image. It's in Kubernetes now. You see, yeah. So I'm going to have to find what this pod's IP is maybe, or here where it says what the external IP is, none. Find a way to map this. I don't know yet. I don't know. So I have everything. I'm really close to moving from the Docker running the image to having it as a Kubernetes service. Now I think I can do kube control describe. Let's do deployment and then the name of our deployment. Yeah, and describe gives us, okay, the name, the namespaces in default, the labels it has, the annotations, replicas, rolling update strategy. Lots of great stuff here. So there is, so it has the image, right? So here's the container in this deployment, IP interface brief, my image, my port is 80. And I see here, maybe here's where I'm missing it, volumes. I want a volume to map this 80 to my local host 8080. Could be onto something there. Now, since we're also doing this, let's do the describe service, and I think that's service. Now here's this service, and again, some IP address information here, some port information here, endpoint information. Maybe it's this endpoint 80. Again, I don't know. I don't know enough about this yet. And then let's look at the pod. And it's the pod, I think, is what I want the IP address from. Oh, well, this is neat. Scheduled, pulled, created, started. So it's certainly up and running. I bet if I go into my Docker here now, you can see that it's in use now. And here I have the pod, IP interface brief. So in theory, somewhere in some virtual space is an Apache server with my HTML page. So that's my next connection is as the network guy to sort this out, where my network is, what my IP is. Do I have to, I think it's that volume out on the container, but I'm not 100% sure. This is really exciting stuff. I'm going to continue the videos, and thank you for joining me. Stay tuned. Okay, so there's a lot of IP addresses involved with Kubernetes, and I have some awesome stuff. Let me show you this. And this is not, I'm not cheating or anything like that. So I've been poking around, and you can see in the background here all my different failed curls and different commands. And so what I've been trying to use is the describe, and you know, there's an IP address here. There's port 80 here. There's, if I look here in VS Code, there's the IPs here. There's different IPs involved here, a host IP and a pod IP. It's all over the place. But I did find this command to port forward. So what I've done is so I did my get pods, and it's the pod, right? Like that's, I know it's the pod related. So can I forward that 80 that's open in the pod to my local host 8080? And that's what I've done here. Kube control port forward IP interface brief 8080 to 80. And you can see this, the translation here. And drumroll please, if we do local host, well, there you go. In a Kubernetes, I have this working. So that's, I'm just so incredibly impressed with this technology and the possibilities. And I've already had some people say, like, why though? Why would you do it this way? That maybe is a better, different discussion video. But I kind of like this idea of CLI as a service, right? And you don't even need the CLI. You just, and in using DNS and things like that. And I've also done one command, IP interface brief. That could be a real PyATS test. So think of it in your head. Like this could be represented as data center core dot IP underscore int underscore brief dot domain dot com, your internal domain. You make that available to your domain. You just type that in and bang, there's your IP interface brief. Kubernetes is just running every 30 seconds and refreshing that data set. I have to figure that out still to come, maybe with cron jobs or maybe some other ways. I got to look into that. But it could be domain controller.crc errors, and we use OREN's tests from the automation suite, right? The CRC check or the half duplex check. Just set up different microservices of things that you would otherwise do at the CLI. And again, I'm going to get into many more microservices. I'm going to build them into my Kubernetes. Now, I'm not sure. I want to do a quick refresh here of what we do have. Now that it's running in Docker desktop, we have my images in use. In my container apps, I have all of my base K8s, Kubernetes, but if I do IP interface brief, I have my pod, and I'm not sure if this is the service or the deployment, but there's two related container apps to that IP interface brief. If I bring it into VS Code and click on the nice Kubernetes extension, I have all of this as a collapsible, right? There's my Docker desktop node, or my cluster. Then I have my node of Docker desktop. And what's inside of my node? Well, the base Kubernetes stuff and my IP interface brief, which is running and has 10.159. Right? I have my workloads, which includes those things that I first brought in. My deployment here is my deployment, and it also includes the network services. Now, it also created the pod, right? And we have it represented as YAML here. Now, I have to figure out how to do that port forwarding as part of my build, and then I have to figure out how to do regular scheduled runs to refresh it and go get the new PyETS data. Incredible progress. Kubernetes for network automation solutions and infrastructure as code. You saw it here. You can do it. Reach out for help. Find me on Twitter, John_Capobianco. Find me on LinkedIn and reach out to connect with me. Leave comments. Leave your projects. Let's get involved. Let's build microservices on top of Kubernetes using things like the PyETS framework. Stay safe and dream big.